welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, I'm Ramira Arlilia, the owner of Your Milk LLC, where I create handcrafted skincare and self-care products. Instead of just listening to true crime stories in the background while I'm in my makeshift studio, I've decided to share them all with you every Saturday. So sit back, hit that subscribe button, and relax as we take on a new journey while I craft a new creation. Check out the description box below for more details on what I'm creating, and feel free to explore our website while you're there. Now, let's make a batch of handmade soap as we journey into today's story. Last week, we did a recap together over part 1 of the Netflix docuseries Dancing for the Devil, the 7M TikTok cult, which focused heavily on sisters Miranda and Melonie Wilking. If you haven't had a chance to check out that video or part 2 of the Netflix series, give this video a like as a placeholder so you can catch up because, baby, there are about to be spoilers. I left this episode with way more questions than I did answers. A few weeks ago, we covered the O.J. Simpson trial, and I had a very helpful subscriber break down for me how O.J. Simpson was found not guilty in the murder trial, but liable in the civil suit. So if you're watching, I'm in desperate need for your expertise regarding the law on this one. If even an iota of what Robert Shinn is accused of doing to the Lee sisters is true, I need the same energy y'all had for Weinstein, R. Kelly, and Bill Cosby. But again, I seem to have gotten ahead of myself, so let me focus back on this episode. Part 2 of the series, titled The Escape, centers around 2 sisters named Prysilla and Melonie Lee, who were also victim of Robert Shinn's Shekinah church nearly 25 years prior to what's currently in the media. Melonie caught wind of the current events because of the live video that the Wilkins family posted in 2022, which seems to be where shit hit the fan with this guy. Melonie realized that what they were describing seemed like similar things she went through before she left the Shekinah church over a decade ago. I've mentioned a number of times throughout my videos that I am very intrigued in the human psyche and find it fascinating how the mind works. In last week's video, I also touched briefly about my own experience with religion. I'm not overly religious, but I do believe in just not being a shitty person. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which is probably the bare minimum of being a Christian, but maybe at least my place in hell may have an air conditioner. That being said, I don't see how Robert Shinn missed that verse in the Bible, and this heathen had it memorized, because he did not do unto others as he would have them do unto him. Or maybe he actually did in his mind. Melonie Lee met Robert Shinn in the early 2000s when she was a teenager. Her home life was not described as stable as the Wilking sisters, but she had her big sister Prysilla as her protector. Personally, I've lost both of my parents, and all I have outside of my children is a handful of people that I could count on, and one of those is being my younger sister. This is what led her to even start going to the Shekinah church in the first place. She had a sense of community and belonging that she was not getting from her personal life, aside from what she shared with her sister. So with that, I started wondering what are some things that we could easily be susceptible to when we are in a vulnerable state that could seem cult-like. I'm not saying it's a cult. Please don't assume that I'm saying it's a cult. My father was in the Marines. My grandmother was a chaplain assistant in the Army. My other grandma was in the Air Force. I've even dated someone in the Navy. So I'm not saying this is a cult. But could the military be seen as one? I mean, their characteristics are similar. What Melonie described seemed more like a support system, and that's what she was desperately seeking. But I guess, like with any case of classic manipulation, it's a gradual process and doesn't just come out of left field. Melonie became really close with Robert's sister and was starting to become part of the family. He even touched on this in one of his sermons by saying most of the people who came to his church were not close with their own families, and he had a deeper connection now with them than they ever did. Which at face value may be true, but as someone who is feeling alone in the world, he came off as their savior. There were 3 instances that stood out to me the most in part 2. One of them being how Melonie Lee escaped the Shekinah church 11 years prior to the docuseries. She said that one day, right before Robert Shinn was about to make an announcement, half a dozen girls burst into the congregation and accused him of sexually assaulting them. According to Melonie, there was pretty much a chain of command which consisted of members being the lowest, then mentors, woman of God, and finally man of God, which was Robert. Remember in the last video, I mentioned that Robert was charging the 7M dancers man of God fees? Yeah, this is how he was stealing their money. Anyway, I noticed that Melonie called them girls, and then when she told the rest of the story, she referred to them as women. It made me wonder if she did so subconsciously or if they just so happened to be young women. Did anyone else catch that? Still sounds very R. Kelly to me, but I digress. Anywho, the women that accused Robert of sexual assault were all vying for the title Woman of God, without knowing that Robert had already taken a wife. His sister led the charge and denounced his status in front of the entire church by saying he should be ashamed of himself and that he was not, in fact, a man of God. Robert charmed the crowd as most narcissists do by making it seem like these women seduced him and that since he was still of the flesh, he unfortunately fell weak to it, which in my opinion is the ultimate pedo plea. Melonie said they lost a lot of members that day, but Robert was so convincing that some chose to stay, including herself and her sister. Robert Shinn's sister, however, hightailed it out of there and took most of the workers with her. With majority of his mistresses now gone, Robert Shinn started turning his attention to Melonie and began making sexual advances towards her. Ew. He had even offered Melonie to another member of the congregation. So for her, that was the last straw, and she too played an escape route and left the Shekinah church. She wanted to take her sister Prysilla with her, but Prysilla refused to leave. This led Prysilla being victim to Robert Shinn and the Shekinah church for an additional 10 years after Melonie left. Robert manipulated the hell out of Prysilla by convincing her that her sister was now cursed because she left the Shekinah church and wronged him. Prysilla has said more than once that Melonie was her weak spot. That was her baby sister. That's who she was basically raising when their parents abandoned them in a sense. So she did everything in her power to try to save her sister, even though Robert was not guiding her in the way that was holy. Prysilla's last straw was when Hannah, who is Robert Shinn's wife, I think like his third or fourth wife at this point, came into the room and destroyed all of her belongings and beat her. And when Robert Shinn entered the room, he said, "Hannah has done nothing wrong to you." And at that point, Prysilla said she would rather be in hell than spend her life like that. You can definitely see the two totally different paths that these sisters are currently in their life. They grew up so close together, and I think at this point of the series, Melonie had been out of the Shekinah church for 11 years, and Prysilla had only been out maybe a year, if that. I know she left in 2022, and the docuseries was filmed in 2022, so not sure how long. And I don't recall them saying exactly how she escaped. You guys will remind me in the comments. So from Melonie's perspective, she said that basically she just suppressed it. She tries not to think about it, but it was brought back up, of course, when the Wilking situation happened. You can still see the pain and the fear in her eyes when she talks about Robert. And with Prysilla, it is even more devastating. She still listens to recordings of Robert's sermons, and I hope that she does not end up in a similar situation or go back to the exact same situation, but she definitely has some healing to do. Part of me wonders if Melonie feels guilty for what Prysilla went through, for the simple fact, one, she's the one who introduced them to the church, and for two, the reason why Prysilla said that she put up with what she did was she was trying to save her sister. And then that makes me wonder if Prysilla then in return resents her for it. because she stayed in the Shekinah church for over 20 years. I'm definitely not leaving out the current victims of 7M who recently left the church. But again, this docuseries is so long and I'm trying to have a focal point. So maybe I'll talk about them more next week. But another part of the story that stood out to me was the fact that the Wilking family reached out to the Lee sisters for guidance on what they can do involving Miranda. Because after that live video, a lot of those members started putting 2 and 2 together and was no longer getting 4. So they left the church, but people like Miranda and B-Dash, they're still there. And they want to figure out how can they get them to see what everyone else is currently seeing. Miranda's family has said that they pretty much had to promise her that they would no longer speak about the Shekinah church while they're together, because Miranda said if she has to hear about this every single time, she's just not going to come around. In part 1, we know that they have been longing to see their daughter. So for them, that is going through that same nightmare again. So they vowed not to talk about it. They share this information with Melonie Lee, and she pretty much said, no, talk about it, press her about it, keep talking about it, bringing it up, because as long as you're quiet about it, she's not going to realize that she's pretty much in danger, and Robert is going to get exactly what he wants. I didn't even think about it that way when her parents were talking about it, because again, I have a teenage daughter. She's 18 years old. So if she decided she wanted to get up and go join a cult, according to the police, there's nothing that I can do about it. So I too think I would feel the same way. I would rather have her in my presence than not at all. But at the same time, how do you save your child? Because at the end of the day, that is your baby. That doesn't mean you have to treat them like a baby. But I mean, now that I do have an adult child, that is my daughter. And if she needs me, I'm going to be there. Not as a crutch, but as a support system. How can you support someone that's not talking to you? And now that I have saddened myself with hypotheticals, let's keep the discussion alive in the comments. Please share your thoughts, because as you see, I have way more questions than answers. I don't understand how the law is not stepping in, at least in this part of the docuseries, because it's proven that this man has done check fraud. I'm pretty sure there's some underage stuff going on. Even if not underage, there's still some sexual assault going on, because it don't sound like nobody but these women of gods that he keeps getting is consenting to half of this stuff. What are your thoughts on Miranda? Do you think it'll take her 23 years to leave the church as it did Prysilla, because she too is thinking that she's saving her family? I'm curious to know your thoughts. Tune in next week as I recap episode 3 titled Reap What You Sow. So if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Until next time, self-care and stay safe.